San Joaquin Valley, California, spring, 1928. While farmers throughout the valley dug traditional wells to prepare for summer irrigation, Joseph Martínez was pouring the concrete cap on a project his neighbors had spent months ridiculing. His 15,000-gallon underground cistern consumed the northeast corner of his 40-acre farm, representing 7 weeks of backbreaking labor that conventional wisdom deemed utterly wasted. Richard Dawson, whose 200-acre operation adjoined Martinez's modest property, leaned against his fence, watching Joseph smooth the final surface of the massive concrete lid. "That concrete could have built you 3 good-grain silos," Dawson called out, shaking his head. "Instead, you've got yourself an underground swimming pool with no water in it." The mathematics of Martinez's project struck most San Joaquin farmers as indefensible. Where traditional wells required approximately 12 days of digging and $75 in materials, Joseph's sprawling water collection system had already consumed 49 days and nearly $320 in concrete, pipe, and filtration components. The 24-foot diameter circular tank extended 12 feet into the ground, requiring excavation of 5,128 cubic feet of earth and the pouring of walls 8 inches thick throughout its circumference. Frank Tompkins, the county agricultural advisor whose recommendations guided water management decisions throughout the region, had visited the site 3 times during construction, each time departing with thinly veiled concerns about Martinez's judgment. "California has groundwater," he reminded Joseph during his final inspection. "25 feet down, not sitting on your roof waiting to be caught." The technical eccentricities of Martinez's system extended far beyond the underground tank itself. 4 buildings on his property had been modified with specialized gutters pitched at precisely 4 degrees to maximize water flow while minimizing debris accumulation. Downspouts incorporated first flush diverters that discarded the initial runoff from each rainfall. An elaborate filtration system featuring layered screens, sand, and activated charcoal processed water before it entered the main storage chamber. Harold Weber, who had dug wells throughout the valley for 25 years, stopped by regularly to marvel at what he called the Mexican's folly. Weber's professional reputation rested on accessing groundwater through proven techniques adapted specifically for San Joaquin Valley conditions. His standard approach, a concrete-lined shaft, 4 feet in diameter, extending 30 feet down, had served hundreds of local families reliably for decades. "I've dug 178 wells in this county alone," Weber announced to anyone who would listen. "Never seen one run dry when properly placed. That rain-catching contraption won't fill a bathtub in our driest months." The fundamental disagreement centered on Joseph's rejection of the region's dependence on groundwater. While his neighbors viewed the relatively shallow water table as California's natural advantage, Martinez spoke quietly about water cycles, rainfall collection, and sustainable withdrawal rates that puzzled listeners accustomed to thinking of water as an essentially unlimited resource. "Every drop that falls is a drop you don't have to pump," he explained to Dawson's 16-year-old son, who had developed reluctant fascination with the unconventional system. "The cistern is a bank. You deposit rain during wet months, withdraw during dry seasons." The analogy made theoretical sense, but struck practical farmers as unnecessary complication in a region where traditional wells had proven adequate for generations. As Joseph installed the final overflow pipe and tested the hand pump that would draw water from his underground reservoir, settlement consensus dismissed the project as an interesting but impractical experiment they could not afford to emulate. James Miller, whose orchards had produced almonds for 15 years using standard irrigation methods, summarized community sentiment while watching Martinez calendar rainfall projections against storage capacity calculations. "Come August," Miller predicted confidently, "he'll be digging a proper well like the rest of us." Some lessons come expensive. By late April 1928, Joseph had completed his water collection system, just as the final spring rains gave way to the characteristic California dry season. Meteorological reports suggested an unusually hot summer approaching, but few residents recognized the early warning signs of what would become the most severe regional drought in recorded history. The completion of Joseph Martinez's cistern coincided with the final substantial rainfall of the spring season. The late April shower delivered 0.78 inches of precipitation over 6 hours, enough to provide the first real-world test of his collection system. Water flowed visibly through the carefully designed gutters and downspouts, the first flush diverters successfully channeling the initial roof runoff away before allowing cleaner water to enter the filtration system. Richard Dawson, passing by on his way to town, paused at the fence line to watch the system in operation. The mathematics of the collection efficiency became immediately apparent. The 2,800 square feet of combined roof surface captured approximately 1,300 gallons during the modest rainfall, a conversion rate of nearly 86% from precipitation to storage. Joseph monitored the entire process with methodical precision, documenting flow rates, filtration efficiency, and initial water quality. His leather-bound notebook contained calculations refined through years of studying traditional water harvesting techniques that his grandfather had brought north from Sonora, Mexico in the 1880s. These methods, developed over centuries in arid regions where groundwater was scarce or inaccessible, represented a fundamentally different philosophy about water management than the extraction-based approach that dominated California agriculture. My grandfather built cisternas that sustained entire villages through dry seasons, Joseph explained to young Thomas Dawson, who had returned for a closer inspection despite his father's skepticism. The Spanish learned the technique from the Moors, who perfected it in North Africa, where they might see no rain for years. The technical specifications of Joseph's system reflected this heritage combined with formal engineering principles he'd studied during 2 years at the agricultural college before returning to manage the family farm. The sand and charcoal filtration chambers were sized according to flow rates calculated for maximum rainfall scenarios. The storage tank's 15,000-gallon capacity represented the precise volume needed to sustain his household and critical irrigation through 120 days without rainfall, assuming careful conservation measures. Frank Tompkins, whose agricultural extension recommendations typically focused on well depth and pump efficiency, found himself examining Joseph's filter maintenance procedure with growing professional interest. The sediment capture is impressive, he acknowledged, studying the particulate matter collected by the initial screening system. But you're still talking about surface water storage in a region with abundant groundwater. It's solving a problem we don't have. Harold Weber maintained the most vocal skepticism, his professional reputation as the valley's premier well digger, requiring defense of traditional water access methods. That system might make sense in a desert, he insisted during an informal gathering at the general store, but we're sitting on an aquifer that's never failed in my lifetime. You don't need to catch rain when you've got a lake under your feet. The technical disagreement centered on fundamental assumptions about water reliability. Weber's 178 wells throughout the county had indeed provided consistent access to the valley's historically dependable groundwater. Joseph's concerns about sustainable withdrawal rates and aquifer repletion cycles struck most listeners as theoretical problems disconnected from practical farming realities. May brought unusually warm temperatures and no additional rainfall. Weather station measurements revealed precipitation 47% below seasonal averages, concerning data that most farmers acknowledged with minimal alarm. Traditional wells continued functioning normally, their apparently limitless supply reinforcing community confidence in conventional water strategies. Joseph began implementing the water conservation methods that formed the second critical component of his system. Gray water from household use was carefully channeled to specific garden areas. Irrigation employed buried clay pots that delivered moisture directly to plant roots, eliminating evaporative loss. His family maintained detailed consumption logs, tracking precisely how their 15,000-gallon reserve was being utilized. By early June, temperatures had risen 12 degrees above historical averages. Local newspapers carried small reports about rainfall deficits throughout the region, but most San Joaquin farmers remained focused on normal seasonal activities. As neighbors continued drawing freely from their wells, few noticed Joseph carefully measuring every gallon his family consumed. His calculations projecting sustainable water access through what meteorologists were beginning to describe as unusual dry conditions that might persist through the summer. By July 1928, the summer heat had firmly established its grip on the San Joaquin Valley. Temperatures consistently reached 95 degrees by mid-morning, climbing past 100 degrees most afternoons. The National Weather Service officially declared drought conditions as rainfall measurements showed a 68% deficit compared to normal patterns. What had begun as unusual dry conditions was now recognized as the most severe water shortage in 20 years. Richard Dawson's well, which had reliably supplied his 200-acre farm for 15 seasons, began producing water with increased sediment content. The water level had dropped 4 feet, requiring his pump to work harder and longer to irrigate the same acreage. Across his fence line, Joseph Martínez maintained his regular watering schedule, using precisely measured withdrawals from his cistern. While Dawson found himself reducing irrigation to essential crops only, Joseph's smaller farm sustained normal operations through careful water management. "My cistern is still at 72% capacity," Joseph explained to Frank Tompkins, who had begun weekly visits to document the system's performance. "At our current use rate of 96 gallons daily, we have enough water for 113 more days without any additional rainfall." The mathematics painted a stark contrast to neighboring farms. Weber reported that wells throughout the region were showing signs of stress. The average well depth of 30 feet, which had seemed more than adequate during normal rainfall years, was proving insufficient as the water table dropped an estimated 7 inches weekly. Farmers began implementing emergency water conservation measures that Joseph had practiced since spring. Harold Weber found himself digging deeper into increasingly dry soil as desperate farmers sought to access retreating groundwater. "Never seen it drop this fast," he admitted while taking a water break in the shade of Joseph's barn. "Had to go down 42 feet on the Miller place yesterday to hit decent flow." Martha Dawson started walking the quarter-mile to Joseph's farm each morning with 2 galvanized buckets, accepting his offer to draw drinking water from his cistern after their own well water became increasingly brackish. The simple act marked a significant shift in community attitude toward the once ridiculed water system. Joseph's daily consumption logs revealed the effectiveness of his conservation methods. Where the average Valley family used approximately 312 gallons daily for household and small garden irrigation, the Martínez family maintained comfortable living standards with 96 gallons, a 69% reduction achieved through simple but consistent practices. Gray water from dishes and washing was directed through dedicated pipes to specific garden areas. Moisture-retaining mulch, 3 inches thick, covered all planted areas. Evening watering prevented evaporative loss. "It's not just about collection," Joseph explained to the growing number of visitors seeking advice. "Storage and smart use are equally important. Every drop saved is a drop you don't need to replace." Frank Tompkins began official documentation of the cistern system, measuring water quality, storage efficiency, and usage patterns. His testing revealed that water from Joseph's cistern contained fewer dissolved minerals and bacterial contaminants than most local wells, which were increasingly pulling from deeper, more concentrated groundwater sources. By early August, the regional impact of the drought had become severe. 3 smaller farms reported wells going completely dry. The county agricultural office issued emergency conservation guidelines that largely mirrored methods Joseph had implemented months earlier. Water hauling by truck began for families whose wells could no longer meet basic needs. Through it all, the Martínez family maintained normal water usage, their underground tank still containing over 10,000 gallons of clean water. The 15,000-gallon capacity that had seemed excessive in April now appeared prescient as Meteorological Services forecast continued drought conditions, with no significant rainfall expected before October. As neighbors increasingly walked the path to Joseph's water pump, the once derided Mexican's folly became a critical community resource. Harold Weber himself arrived one evening with technical questions about cistern construction that would have been unimaginable 3 months earlier. Richard Dawson, watching his almond trees showing signs of severe stress, while Joseph's smaller orchard remained healthy, found himself reconsidering fundamental assumptions about water management that had guided 3 generations of California agriculture. Late August 1928 brought catastrophic conditions to the San Joaquin Valley as the California governor officially declared a state of emergency. Temperatures had maintained above 100 degrees for 17 consecutive days, with rainfall deficits now exceeding 78% below normal annual totals. The sustained heat and absence of precipitation had transformed what began as a concerning dry spell into the region's most devastating drought in recorded history. Richard Dawson's well, which had first shown signs of stress in July, now produced only a sporadic trickle, despite being deepened twice by Harold Weber. The once productive 200-acre operation had been reduced to salvaging 40 acres of essential crops, while watching helplessly as almond orchards, representing 15 years of investment, showed signs of terminal decline. The Dawson family restricted household water usage to 12 gallons per day, barely enough for minimal drinking and cooking needs. "Never seen it this bad," Weber admitted, his weathered face showing the strain of 18-hour workdays, attempting to access retreating groundwater for desperate families. "I've dug down 63 feet on the Wilson place and hit nothing but dry sand. The aquifer's failing everywhere." The crisis had overwhelmed his equipment and expertise, with water table measurements indicating a drop of nearly 12 feet since April. Calculations suggested the remaining accessible groundwater would be depleted within weeks without rainfall. Frank Tompkins, whose agricultural advice had always centered on proper well management, now faced professional reckoning as traditional water strategies failed catastrophically throughout his jurisdiction. "Our region historically receives 15.2 inches of annual rainfall," he explained during an emergency community meeting. "We're currently 11.8 inches below that figure, with no relief forecast." The county's emergency response included water delivery by truck from eastern mountain sources, but limited supplies allowed only 8 gallons daily per family, less than one-third the absolute minimum recommended for basic needs. 3 elderly residents had been hospitalized for heat-related illness, exacerbated by dehydration. Livestock suffered visibly, with dairy production falling 84% as farmers struggled to provide minimal drinking water to preserve breeding stock. Throughout this escalating crisis, the Martínez family maintained essentially normal operations. Joseph's 15,000-gallon cistern still held 8,650 gallons, despite the lack of additional rainfall since April. His careful water management allowed continued household function while sustaining crucial plantings. The stark visual contrast became impossible to ignore. The Martínez property remained a functional farm, while surrounding operations withered. The turning point came during the second week of September, when Joseph hosted the Emergency Water Management Committee at his property. 23 farmers, including his once vocal critics, gathered around his cistern as he demonstrated the system that had sustained his family through the catastrophic drought. "This isn't advanced technology," Joseph explained, opening his maintenance access to reveal the still substantial water reserve. "These same principles have worked for centuries in regions far drier than California." The assembled farmers, who had dismissed his methods months earlier, now took detailed notes as he outlined the entire system from collection to conservation. Richard Dawson, whose family now relied on Joseph's cistern for drinking water, publicly acknowledged what the crisis had demonstrated beyond argument. "I called this man wasteful," he admitted to the gathered community. "Now his waste is keeping my family alive while my efficient well sits useless." Harold Weber, the valley's well expert whose reputation had been built on accessing supposedly unlimited groundwater, asked specific technical questions about cistern construction methods that could be implemented immediately. "I've been digging in the wrong direction," he concluded after examining Joseph's system. "Going deeper isn't working. We need to think differently." Frank Tompkins formally requested Joseph's assistance in developing emergency adaptations of his water harvesting techniques that could be implemented throughout the county. The Agricultural Extension Office would immediately begin documenting the system's specifications for inclusion in official drought response recommendations. As the meeting concluded, Joseph offered controlled water sharing from his remaining reserves, carefully calculated to support neighboring families through October, when meteorologists predicted the first possibility of rainfall. The community's transformation from skepticism to desperate appreciation represented more than vindication. It signaled a fundamental shift in understanding water management in a region where climate patterns were proving less predictable than generations had assumed. "The cistern isn't the innovation," Joseph told them, pointing to his documentation of daily water usage patterns. "The real change is understanding water as precious rather than endless." The mathematical reality was undeniable. His 40-acre farm remained viable, while operations 10 times larger faced potential ruin because of a water collection system that had once been dismissed as unnecessary complication in a land of abundant groundwater. By October 1928, the San Joaquin Valley had transformed into a community united by water scarcity and the urgent adoption of rainwater harvesting techniques. Joseph Martínez's home became the center for daily instruction sessions, where he patiently explained cistern principles to farmers who had once ridiculed his methods. Each morning, neighbors gathered around his kitchen table, where detailed diagrams showed simplified collection systems that could be implemented with limited materials and minimal construction expertise. "You don't need 15,000 gallons to start," Joseph explained to Harold Weber, who had transitioned from well digging to cistern installation almost overnight. "Even a 1,500-gallon system will catch enough from a single roof to provide emergency household water." Weber's decades of excavation experience proved invaluable as he adapted Joseph's designs for rapid deployment, reducing construction time from 7 weeks to just 12 days by focusing on essential components and smaller initial capacity. The technical knowledge transfer unfolded methodically as Joseph separated his comprehensive system into manageable components that drought-stressed farmers could implement immediately. Roof washing mechanisms using simple first flush diverters diverted the initial runoff that contained dust, bird droppings, and debris. Basic filtration systems employed layered sand, charcoal, and screen materials available at the general store. Storage solutions ranged from proper concrete cisterns to expedient liner-equipped pits that could be upgraded later. Frank Tompkins documented every aspect of the emergency adaptations, creating county-approved specifications that standardized construction while ensuring water safety. His technical bulletins reached 27 communities throughout the drought region, transforming Joseph's once ridiculed innovations into officially recommended practice. Martínez's system implementation became recognized terminology in agricultural extension communications, with Joseph's careful measurements and conservation practices forming the core of the recommendations. Richard Dawson, whose large operation had suffered catastrophic losses despite his earlier confidence in traditional methods, became an unexpected advocate for rainwater harvesting. His crew completed a 4,000-gallon temporary cistern in just 9 days, with plans for a permanent 20,000-gallon system once resources allowed. "We've withdrawn 16,000 gallons from aquifers annually for every acre," he acknowledged during a community meeting, never once considering whether we were taking more than nature could replace. Community work parties formed to assist elderly or resource-limited families with cistern installation. The Wilson property, whose well had failed completely in early September, now featured a 3,200-gallon collection system built through cooperative labor. Mathematical projections showed this would provide 83 days of critical water supply during similar future drought conditions. By late October, 37 emergency water harvesting systems had been completed throughout the immediate area. The adapted designs reflected the urgency of the situation: smaller capacity, simplified filtration, and expedient materials, but incorporated the core principles that had kept Joseph's family self-sufficient while traditional water sources failed. Each system included his carefully designed conservation components: gray water recycling for garden use, moisture-retaining ground covers, and evening-only irrigation schedules. Harold Weber's professional transformation proved particularly significant as the region's trusted water expert embraced fundamentally different approaches. His modified cistern designs incorporated construction techniques refined through decades of well installation, creating hybridized systems that combine traditional craftsmanship with innovative water collection. "I've spent 25 years helping people pull water from the ground," he reflected while finishing a neighborhood cistern. "Never thought to catch what falls from the sky." The economic implications became increasingly apparent as October continued without significant rainfall. Farms with operational cisterns maintained limited production and protected critical investments despite the ongoing drought. Mathematical modeling by the Agricultural Extension Office showed that even modest rainwater harvesting systems, capturing 50% of roof runoff, could have prevented approximately 60% of the catastrophic crop losses experienced throughout the region. Joseph continued refining his water conservation techniques, developing methodical approaches that integrated cistern water use with drought-resistant planting patterns. His demonstration garden showed how significantly reduced water quantities could maintain productive growing when applied precisely where and when plants required moisture. The 96 gallons his family used daily, compared to pre-drought averages of 312 gallons for similar households, represented carefully calculated efficiency rather than deprivation. As November approached with meteorologists finally predicting relief from the historic drought, the community's transformation was unmistakable. Water collection barrels appeared beside homes that had relied exclusively on wells for generations. Gutters and downspouts, once considered primarily for building protection, were now recognized as crucial components of water security. The wasteful concrete that had once prompted neighborhood mockery had become the foundation for a fundamental shift in how the San Joaquin Valley understood its relationship with water. The first substantial rainfall arrived in the San Joaquin Valley during the second week of November 1928, delivering 1.42 inches over 3 days. Throughout the region, the contrast between water management approaches became immediately apparent. Traditional wells, severely depleted by months of drought, showed minimal immediate recovery as parched soil absorbed the majority of rainfall before it reached the aquifer. Hydrologists estimated groundwater replenishment would require 4 to 6 months of above-average precipitation to restore pre-drought levels. Farmers depending solely on wells faced continued uncertainty despite the welcome moisture. Joseph Martínez's cistern, by stark comparison, captured approximately 2,170 gallons from the modest rainfall, immediately replenishing 15.8% of its total capacity. The mathematics of direct collection versus groundwater recharge demonstrated the fundamental efficiency difference. While traditional systems awaited gradual aquifer replenishment measured in months, rainwater harvesting provided immediate water security with each precipitation event. The 37 emergency cisterns, constructed throughout the community, collectively captured over 76,000 gallons, creating substantial local resilience against continued dry conditions. The cistern gives you independence from groundwater recovery timelines, Joseph explained during a county agricultural meeting, where his system was formally presented as a drought mitigation strategy. Every inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof yields approximately 600 gallons of collectible water. The mathematical reality, demonstrated through careful measurement during subsequent December rainfalls, showed cisterns reaching 80% capacity, while wells remained significantly below normal production levels. By January 1929, consistent winter precipitation had finally broken the drought's grip on the region. Frank Tompkins' comprehensive report to the California Department of Agriculture documented the catastrophic failure of traditional water systems alongside the remarkable resilience demonstrated by rainwater harvesting approaches. His findings, supported by 6 months of meticulous data collection, led to the establishment of the State Drought Preparedness Initiative, which incorporated cistern construction as a primary recommendation for agricultural water security. The transformation continued through 1930 as 17 full-scale 15,000-plus gallon cisterns were constructed throughout the valley, closely following Joseph's original specifications. Richard Dawson's new 22,000-gallon system became a model for large-scale implementation, incorporating refinements based on Joseph's original design while adapting to commercial agricultural requirements. Harold Weber established a specialized construction company dedicated to cistern installation, converting his decades of well-digging expertise into leadership in rainwater harvesting infrastructure. By 1935, the county agricultural guidelines had been fundamentally rewritten to incorporate hybrid water management approaches that balanced groundwater extraction with rainwater harvesting. Drought preparation recommendations specified minimum cistern capacity based on household size and agricultural requirements. The 42-page technical bulletin, Water Security Through Diversified Sources, featured Joseph's system as the foundational case study that had demonstrated practical effectiveness during crisis conditions. The long-term economic impact became measurable as the region experienced another significant drought in 1937. Farms with established rainwater harvesting systems maintained 72% of normal production, while those relying exclusively on wells averaged only 31%. The resilience difference translated to approximately $1.2 million in prevented losses throughout the county, validating the infrastructure investment many had initially considered wasteful. Most significantly, no families required emergency water delivery during the 1937 drought, a dramatic improvement from the humanitarian crisis of 1928. Joseph Martínez received formal recognition in 1940 when the California Agricultural Association presented him with their Innovation and Resource Management Award. The citation acknowledged his role in transforming water security practices throughout the state's drought-vulnerable regions. By then, over 400 large-scale cisterns had been constructed following variations of his original design, creating widespread adoption of techniques once dismissed as unnecessary complication in a region of abundant groundwater. The technical evolution continued through the 1940s as Joseph collaborated with agricultural engineers to develop integrated systems that optimize both collection efficiency and water conservation. The Martínez method became standard terminology in agricultural extension publications, referring to comprehensive water management that combines specific collection techniques with precise usage patterns. His original conservation target of 96 gallons daily became the benchmark for household efficiency during drought conditions. Visitors to the San Joaquin Valley in 1950 could easily distinguish between original settlements built around well-dependent water strategies and newer developments incorporating rainwater harvesting as fundamental infrastructure. The concrete cistern lids, once ridiculed as wasteful extravagance, had transformed into visible symbols of agricultural foresight and resource security. Joseph Martínez, now in his 60s, continued demonstrating system refinements to agricultural students who traveled specifically to study the water management approach that had revolutionized drought preparedness throughout California's agricultural communities. The innovation that neighbors had once mockingly called the Mexican's folly had become essential infrastructure, supporting the region's continued prosperity through increasingly unpredictable climate patterns. creating a legacy of resource wisdom that extended far beyond one man's determination to challenge conventional thinking about water.